Imagine returning home from the hospital, weak and tired, only to find your own front door key no longer works. The house you poured your life into, the memories held within its walls, suddenly out of reach. This is the heartbreaking story of a mother who faced the ultimate betrayal from her own son, proving that sometimes the quietest people hold the most surprising power. I stood in front of the house I had lived in for over 35 years. It was the house I had cleaned countless times, painted twice, and finally paid off every single penny. But today, the key in my hand didn't fit the lock. At first, I thought my fingers were just shaking. The hospital had let me go only a few hours earlier. My right hip still hurt from the fall I had, and the pain medicine hadn't really started working yet. I shifted my weight and tried the key again. It slid in this time, but it wouldn't turn. I looked up. The doorknob was different, shinier. The old one had a small scratch from when Daniel, my son, tried to carve his name into it with a house key when he was 7 years old. That mark was gone now. This new handle had no memory of that. I rang the doorbell. Nothing. No sound. I stepped back and noticed the doorbell itself had been changed too. New frame, new cover, a different sound. Still, I waited. The sun was hot above me. The concrete under my feet had cracks from too many summers. I pressed the doorbell again, holding my breath, just like I had so many times before when Daniel was little, hoping he would come running, smiling, calling Mom. This time, the door didn't open. So, I called his cell phone. The screen lit up with Daniel Mobile. He answered on the third ring. "Hello, Daniel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's me. I'm outside. The key, your key, it doesn't work." There was a pause. "Who is this?" he asked. "It's Mom," I said softly. "I just got back. They let me out this morning. I took a taxi straight home." He cut me off. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice was flat, far away, like a stranger reading from a script. "I don't know who this is, but my mother passed away 3 weeks ago." My knees felt weak. I held onto the iron gate for support. "Daniel, what are you saying?" "Silence." "Then, whoever you are pretending to be her, it's sick. You need help." I could hear someone in the background, a woman's voice, muffled, then sharp. "Hang up. Don't talk to them." "I don't know what game you're playing," Daniel said, his voice colder now, "but don't call this number again." And then he hung up. I stood there, phone still against my ear, hearing nothing but the empty dial tone. 3 weeks ago, that's when I was taken to the hospital. A neighbor had found me lying on the bathroom floor after I slipped and hit my head on the sink. The emergency workers said I was lucky. My hip was broken, not shattered. I would be walking again within a month. They promised. No one visited me. Not Daniel, not his wife. Not even a text message. But I had told myself they were busy, probably didn't even know I was in the hospital. That when I came home, things would go back to normal. That false hope ended now, right here under the sky, in front of the house I had cleaned after flu seasons, after birthday parties, after heartbreaks. The house I had once taken out another loan on to pay for Daniel's braces. The house where I'd stayed up late, sewing his Halloween costumes by hand. Now, I wasn't even allowed inside. My hands were shaking. A neighbor rode by on a bike, nodding politely, not knowing that the woman standing at the gate, dressed in clean pants and a wrinkled sweater, had just been told she was dead by her only child. The lock gleamed at me, unaffected. The porch light had been changed too. It was a motion sensor light, now. I stepped back, and it turned on, bright, harsh, cold. Like him. Like Daniel, the boy I had taken care of through asthma attacks. The boy I had taught how to ride a bike in this very driveway. The boy I had fed, clothed, loved, and who now refused to admit I existed. I didn't cry. I wish I could say I did, that I collapsed right there, crying into my purse like some sad character in a TV movie. But I didn't. I stood up straighter. I put the phone back in my purse, and I stared at the house until my feet stopped shaking. Inside those walls was my chair, my recipes, my wedding photo, the blanket I made when I was pregnant with Daniel, folded neatly at the foot of the guest bed. But I wasn't welcome anymore. He had changed the locks, and, in doing so, changed something else, something deeper, more lasting. I turned away. My reflection stared back at me from the dark glass of the living room window. An old woman with tired eyes and a cane. Someone forgotten. Someone erased. I took a slow breath and walked back to the curb, not knowing yet that this moment wasn't the end. It was the beginning. 2 hours. That's how long I stood in the sunny corner of the parking lot outside his office building. My cane rested against the curb, my purse held tight against my chest like a shield. I had called the front desk to ask if Daniel was there. They said he was in meetings. I waited anyway. I could have left. I should have. But I needed to see his face. I needed to believe that the voice on the phone wasn't his. That there had been a mistake. That once he saw me, he'd run toward me, arms open, shocked by what he'd said. But when the glass door slid open and he stepped out, my false hope broke. He was laughing, wearing a navy blue jacket, phone in hand, beside his wife, Melissa. They looked neat, confident, untroubled. I straightened up, smoothed my shirt. My heart pounded against my ribs as if it were trying to escape. He saw me. His eyes narrowed. The laughter died. Melissa saw me next. Her lips tightened into a small, annoyed line. Daniel's steps slowed, then stopped. His eyebrows furrowed, but not with worry, with calculation. "Mom," he said, walking closer. But his voice wasn't warm. It was careful. I smiled, just a little. "Daniel, I need to talk to you. Just a moment, please." He sighed. People were coming and going around us. People in suits, carrying clipboards, holding coffees. None of them noticed the mother standing there, holding on to her dignity. "Mom," he said, louder now, "you can't just show up like this. You're causing a scene." I blinked. "Daniel, I just came back from the hospital. The door was locked. You changed the locks. I don't understand. Why would you do that?" He looked away for a second, his jaw tight. Melissa stepped forward. "The house is ours now," she said clearly. "You weren't living there anymore. We needed the space." Space. I repeated. "Melissa, I was gone for 3 weeks because I broke my hip. That house, it's still my—" Daniel cut in, his voice low but firm. "Mom, let's not do this here." "Then where?" I asked. "Where can I talk to my own son?" He glanced over his shoulder. A few coworkers were watching now. Then, softly, he said, "You don't live there anymore. That's our family home now. You should think about finding a place that suits your situation better." I stared at him. "My situation?" "You're older, Mom. You need care. You can't keep living on your own," Melissa added, crossing her arms. "We've been looking into assisted living, some really nice places. You'll have your own space, meals, activities." My lips trembled. "You mean a nursing home?" Daniel rubbed his temples. "It's not like that." Tears filled my eyes. "Daniel, I built that house. I paid the mortgage. I painted the walls. I planted every single rose bush in that yard. You took your first steps in that living room. That's the only home I've ever known." He stared at me for a long moment, then looked down at his watch, as if I were a burden on his time. "Mom," he said, his voice becoming harder, "don't make this ugly. Just let it go. Move on." My throat tightened. "I'm your mother, Daniel. Your real mother. Flesh and blood. How could you do this to me?" He laughed. It was a dry, sharp, mean laugh. "Let's be real," he said coldly. "You're just some old woman now. A problem. You want the truth. You're like a bug. You take from people. I'm done pretending you're still useful." The words hit like a punch. Melissa didn't even flinch. She folded her arms tighter. "You've got 2 choices," he said, stepping forward now, close enough for me to see the disgust in his eyes. "1, you go to a home quietly. 2, I'll have you put away. You want to talk about that fall in the bathroom? I'll tell them you're unstable, that you forgot where you were, that you imagine things." My heart stopped. He leaned in. "They'll believe me. I have power of attorney, remember?" My knees buckled. I reached for my cane. Melissa stepped forward. "Daniel, let's go," she snapped. "We're late." And then, as she brushed past me, she pushed. Not hard, but enough. My feet got tangled. I slipped. I fell. The concrete scraped my hands. My purse flew open, papers scattering onto the ground. My cane clattered next to the car tire. Daniel didn't move. Melissa didn't look back. No one helped me up. I lay there, staring at the sky, blue, perfect, mocking, wondering how I had ever called that man my son. People say your children are your lasting mark. That day, mine tried to erase me. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and old pine cleaner, a mix that stuck to the curtains and settled into the rough bedspread like memories that refused to fade. I sat on the edge of the bed, my cane propped against the chipped nightstand, and pulled the old leather folder from my bag. It had cracked corners and a faint scent of lavender oil, which I used to put on letters decades ago. Inside were the papers that had traveled with me through every time of my life. I unfolded them slowly. The folds were deep from years of being untouched. Yellowed bills from the power company, a copy of my nursing license, long expired but still showing my maiden name, the deed to the house, my house. And beneath it all, a photo. Daniel at age 4, smiling with chocolate on his chin, and both hands holding a teddy bear I'd saved from a church sale for 50 cents. I hadn't meant to cry, but there it was, hot, silent sadness spilling from the corners of my eyes as I stared at that child. The one who used to call me Mama with sticky fingers and a runny nose. The one who used to beg for one more bedtime story, even after I'd worked 2 shifts in a row, and my legs hurt as if they were filled with rocks. The pain of what had happened outside that office building burned in my chest. But it wasn't the worst pain I'd known. No, that came years before, when I was 32 and a widow. Daniel's father died when a factory building fell down. The metal supports broke. He was buried beneath steel and silence. They brought me his wedding ring in a plastic bag and told me he hadn't felt a thing. They didn't know what came after. A house payment I couldn't afford, a toddler who didn't understand death, and a future that shrank like cold cloth in the wash. I took night shifts at the hospital, wiped blood from tile floors, held the hands of dying strangers while my son slept 2 rooms away, not knowing that his mother had learned to cry without making a sound. There were months I lived on canned beans and instant coffee so Daniel could have new shoes for school. Years I fixed the same winter coat until the inside was more loose threads than fabric. And then the house. It wasn't much, a 1-story house with noisy floors and broken edges around the walls. But it was ours. I put down the first payment with the money I earned from extra shifts, putting them together like stitches in a wound. I painted the walls myself, planted roses along the walkway, even though arthritis had started to settle into my knuckles. I remember the day we moved in. Daniel was 8. He ran from room to room shouting, "Is this one mine?" as if he couldn't believe he'd get his own door, his own window, his own place to dream. I didn't tell him we'd have to eat oatmeal for dinner for the next 6 weeks just to afford the first house payment. That house was more than just bricks. It was a promise, a proof, a special place to everything I'd lived through. When Daniel graduated from high school, we took a photo on the front porch. I wore a blue dress I'd found on sale, and he wore the same crooked tie he'd worn to his first dance. He hugged me tight, looked me in the eye, and said, "You're the reason I got here, Mom. You're my strong point, my heart, this house. It's because of you." I believed him. Even on his wedding day, when Melissa's family took every front row seat and left me in the 3rd row beside the punch bowl, I still told myself it was love, that he was just feeling overwhelmed, that he'd come back to me. I held on to that belief like a candle in the wind until he changed the locks, until he told the world I was dead, until he watched me fall and didn't lift a finger to help. I stared at the folder in my lap, at the deed with my name on it, and wondered how something that felt so strong could become so weak. How a son who once ran to me crying when he scraped his knee now looked at me like I was a burden too heavy to carry. How a woman who gave everything could become invisible. 30 years of silence, of giving up my own needs, of saying yes when I should have said no. And now I was a ghost outside my own home. My fingers traced the edge of the photo again. Daniel, the boy with the sweet smile. The boy who made me believe I could be more than my sadness. The boy who once whispered, "I love you more than the stars." That boy was gone. In his place stood a man who called me dead, who watched his wife push me and did nothing, who stood on a foundation I had poured with my own hands and dared to say it was his. I folded the papers back into the folder, stood slowly, and looked around the motel room. Nothing here was mine, but at least I knew what was. That house. That house was still mine. And it was time they remembered that. It was a quiet morning, too quiet, the kind where you can hear the soft sounds of the walls and the thoughts in your own head. I stood in front of the small fireproof box I had pulled out from the bottom of the motel closet. My fingers trembled, not from age, but from having a clear purpose. The key was still tucked inside the lining of my purse, the same purse I carried to every hospital shift, every school meeting, every funeral and graduation. I turned the lock slowly, letting the click echo in the room like a drum beat. Inside, beneath a stack of old IDs and my wedding ring wrapped in soft cloth, was the red folder, the deed, my name in ink that had not faded. Margaret Langley, sole owner. No other names, no transfers, no trusts. The house, the one I had worked hard for, sacrificed for, built a life inside, was still mine, legally, completely. I sat down at the tiny motel desk, the one with the chipped edge and the fake wood pattern, and I opened my laptop. I hadn't used it since before the fall, but my hands remembered what to do. Username, password, login. I searched for the name I remembered from years ago, Kelsey Tranesk. She had been a smart young legal assistant, fresh out of school, when I met her. Her grandmother had been one of my patients. Back then, she'd brought me tea during my night shifts. Now she was a lawyer with her own small office in the city. I sent her a message with a subject line that read, "Urgent property rights." She called within the hour. "Miss Langley," she asked, her voice still calm and warm. "Is everything all right?" I told her everything, not all the feelings, not yet, but the facts. She didn't gasp. She didn't say, "How could a son do that?" She just asked for the address, the dates, the papers. And then she said, "Come in tomorrow. We'll fix this." The next day, I walked into her office with the red folder under my arm. She looked older, yes, but still sharp, still kind. She looked at the deed, checked the property records, and looked up at me. "Margaret, the house is yours," she said. "Every legal document confirms it. There's no transfer, no shared ownership, no debt on it. If he changed the locks and took over, he committed a legal occupation. We can file for immediate action." I nodded slowly. "I want the locks changed," I said. "I want a new tenant." She tilted her head. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I replied. "I'm not going back there to live, but I won't let him take what isn't his." She prepared the papers that day. First, ending any past legal powers he had over me. Then, a formal letter telling him to stop. A proper notice that I was taking back my property. And finally, my favorite part, a public listing for rent. Charming 3-bedroom home available immediately for rent. Quiet neighborhood. Ideal for respectful, family-minded tenants. Preference given to single parents or multi-generational households. Must appreciate rose gardens. Kelsey smiled when she read it back to me. "Anyone in mind?" "Someone who still knows what a home is," I said. "Not just a place to sleep or decorate, but a place you honor." That afternoon, the papers were filed with the city. The letters were sent by special messenger to Daniel's workplace and his last known address. Within 72 hours, my locks would be replaced, the house would be legally mine again, and Daniel, he would be served. I sat in Kelsey's office long after the documents were signed, staring out the window at the courthouse across the street. My reflection looked back at me. Older, yes, but no longer shaking. There was strength in my shoulders again. He thought I'd disappear, that I'd feel ashamed and hide away. But he forgot one thing. That house wasn't his to get. It was my strength. It had supported me through winters with no heat, summers with no air conditioning, nights with no sleep. It had held my sadness, my pride, my son's laughter. And now it would hold justice. And I was no longer asking to be let back in. I was taking back the keys. It was a warm Sunday afternoon, the kind that smelled faintly of cut grass and distant barbecue smoke. The kind of day that once meant lemonade on the porch, crossword puzzles in the shade, and Daniel's laughter echoing down the hallway. But not this Sunday. This Sunday, Daniel came home and found it no longer was his. I wasn't there to see it in person, but the new tenant, Mr. Thompson, called me later. His voice caught somewhere between politeness and disbelief. He was banging on the door, like he expected it, to open by magic. He told me, didn't even knock first, just started twisting the handle like it belonged to him. It didn't. Not anymore. Earlier that week, I had signed the rental agreement. Mr. Thompson was a retired school principal, a widower raising his teenage grandson. He'd seen the advertisement, called me with a voice that reminded me of an old radio announcer. Respectful, calm, honest. I liked him instantly. When I handed him the keys, he had tears in his eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked. "This is a beautiful home." "I'm sure," I said. "Just treat it like it mattered to someone once." And now, only 5 days later, Daniel stood outside that same house, shocked to find the lock no longer obeyed him. The gate had been changed too. New keypad, new code, no more familiar click of a latch. He stood there in his neat button-down shirt and sunglasses, still dressed like he had a reputation to protect. He pressed the doorbell, and it sang out a gentle chime. The door opened. Mr. Thompson looked him up and down calmly. "Can I help you?" he asked. Daniel blinked. Yeah, I'm here to see my mom." There was a pause. Mr. Thompson smiled. "She doesn't live here." Daniel's voice changed. "This is my house." "No," Mr. Thompson replied. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I panicked," he said. "You were in the hospital, and I thought, what if you didn't make it? We'd be stuck. No will, no deed, no plan." She was pushing me. I was scared. Scared. That was the word he chose. Not cruel, not selfish, just scared. He looked up at me, waiting for something. Pity, maybe, a softening. Instead, I walked to the drawer by the kitchen and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I handed it to him. He stared at it. His face changed. It was a photocopy of the 5-year lease I'd signed with Mr. Thompson. Dates, terms, signatures, everything legal and binding. Effective immediately, I said softly, "The house is no longer available for family use." He blinked. "So that's it. That's it." He looked down again, his jaw tight. "I thought maybe you'd let me explain." "You just did." He folded the paper in half, then again. His hands were shaking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said. "I thought I was doing what needed to be done." I nodded once. He looked up. "That's all?" he asked. I met his gaze. My voice was calm, steady. "You said once," I told him, "that I was your home, that everything you were started with me." He didn't deny it. "Well," I continued, "you've made your own home now, one where I don't belong. And that's fine, but you don't get to come back just because it's convenient." He opened his mouth, then closed it. I walked to the door. He stood slowly, as if the weight of his choices had finally caught up with him. At the doorway, he turned. "You're really not going to forgive me?" I didn't smile, didn't frown. "I already have," I said, "but that doesn't mean I'm coming back." He nodded, just once, a small, accepting movement, the kind people make when they realize the fight is over, and they lost. He stepped outside, paused. Then I said it, quiet but clear. "I used to be the house you came home to, Daniel. Now I'm just the landlord." And then I closed the door, not in anger, not in hate, but in peace. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting on the other side. The smell of garlic and rosemary drifted through the little apartment like a memory I chose to keep. The table was set with plates that didn't match and napkins folded into triangles. A simple blue tablecloth was draped across it, the one with tiny sunflowers stitched in each corner. I had found it in a thrift shop the week before, and bought it for no other reason than that it made me smile. Tonight was dinner. Not a celebration, not a holiday, just a night I chose. 6 guests, all women, all over 60, all survivors of one kind or another. There was Helen, who'd once been forced out of her daughter's house when she became too much work. There was Darlene, whose son sold her car without asking and told her she was safer not driving. There was Estelle, whose only fault had been living longer than she was useful in a family that cared more about how things looked than about people. And then there was me. We brought dishes like gifts to a special place. Warm bread, roasted vegetables, lemon cake. Someone brought wine. Someone else brought tears. No one said sorry for either. The apartment filled with the sounds I'd missed for years. Forks clinking, laughter that was not hushed, stories told without fear of being judged. No one asked for permission to speak. No one waited to be noticed. For once, we weren't being guests. We were simply seen. After dinner, I brought out the old teapot, the one Daniel used to call the genie lamp. It still whistled when it boiled. The sound made someone laugh and someone else cry. We sat under the string lights I had taped across the ceiling beams. Not fancy, but warm, cozy, like fireflies in a jar. Helen raised her glass. To the forgotten, she said. Estelle added. To the ones who were asked to leave the house, but never left the love. I smiled and raised my own glass. To the women who were told they were too much, too loud, too old, too expensive, and to the truth they carried quietly. We clinked our glasses, and I felt something rise in my chest. Not sadness, not anger, something lighter. Peace. After they left, I stood in the doorway, for a long time, watching the hallway become still. The scent of roasted garlic stayed on my sleeves. I breathed it in like perfume. The next morning, I woke early. No alarm, no demands, just birdsong. The soft kind that slips through cracked windows and lands gently on your skin. I made coffee, sat on the small balcony with a blanket around my shoulders. The world moved without me needing to chase it. For once, I wasn't proving anything. I wasn't Daniel's mother or anyone's burden or a woman waiting to be led. I was simply Margaret, owner of a house I no longer lived in, but still owned. Landlord, survivor, friend, a woman who had once been erased and then drawn again by her own hand. Later that afternoon, I walked to the bookstore, looked around without rushing, bought a novel I'd never heard of just because the cover was blue and peaceful. I stopped by the flower stand on the way home and bought myself tulips, yellow, bright, alive, the kind no one had to send out of guilt. When I got home, I placed them in a chipped glass vase and set them by the window. And then I sat, not because I was tired, but because I finally could. If you've ever been called a burden, not to your face, of course, not always. Sometimes it's said with a sigh when you ask for a ride to the doctor. Sometimes it's in the silence when your birthday isn't remembered. Sometimes it's the way your chair is the only one without a cushion at the family table. Sometimes it's just how they look at you when you forget something twice. If you've ever stood in the doorway of a home you built, brick by brick, choice by painful choice, and felt like a stranger in it. If you've ever walked past a hallway filled with photos of people you raised, and not one of them includes you anymore. If you've ever held your tongue so long that it began to hurt inside your chest, and you called it peace because no one else wanted to hear the truth, then this story was for you. This story was not just about a house. It was about a woman who gave and gave and gave until they forgot she had anything left to take, until they started treating her like the floor beneath their feet, solid, silent, stepped on, expected to hold the weight, and never complain when it cracked. They thought she'd disappear. But here's what they didn't understand. A woman who has nothing left to lose has nothing left to fear. A mother who's been pushed aside becomes a powerful force when she finally turns around and sees what she's been carrying. And a grandmother who's been quiet too long will speak with the power of every moment she stayed silent just to keep the peace. So if they ever made you feel like you didn't matter anymore, if they ever told you directly or in subtle ways that your time had passed, that you should sit down, be quiet, fade out, let me remind you, you are not invisible. You are not the background of anyone's story. You are not just a support for someone else's success. You are not a faded photograph on the fireplace. You are not a leftover. You are not a mistake. You are the reason the house stood as long as it did. You are the one who paid the bills while they slept. You are the one who stayed up when they were sick and cheered when they were proud and forgave when they forgot. You have the right to say no. You don't have to accept the small pieces they give you. You don't have to smile through the insult just to keep the invitation. You don't have to be thankful for being put up with. You don't owe them your silence. You don't owe anyone the version of you that gave and got nothing back. You have the right to take back what was always yours. Your voice, your story, your place at the table, your name on the deed, your photo on the wall, your seat in the center, not the sides. And maybe most importantly of all, you have the power to write your own ending. Sometimes it comes with shouting. Sometimes it comes with a set of new keys, a rental agreement, a pot of tea, a dinner table full of people who choose you, not because they are forced to, but because they truly see you. Sometimes justice is peace. Sometimes it's a locked door. Sometimes it's an open heart. And sometimes it's simply choosing yourself after everyone else forgot to. So, if this story touched you, if it made your throat ache or your eyes sting, if it reminded you of something you've been too tired to remember, then you are not alone. Not anymore.